Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has just landed here in Berlin for a day of diplomacy ahead of Friday's bilateral meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. His helicopter landed just outside the German parliament, where he was met by Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who is set to lead talks with various world leaders this afternoon. Zelenskyy has said he will reject any Russian proposal to pull Ukrainian troops out of the eastern Donbas region. Zelenskyy warned that withdrawing Ukrainian forces would pave the way for Russia to conduct further offensives. He repeated his position that territorial issues should only be discussed after Moscow has agreed to a ceasefire. Well, Chancellor Merz and President Zelenskyy are scheduled to hold video calls with world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump. First up is a call with European leaders from France, Italy, the UK, and Poland, as well as EU and NATO representatives. That will be followed by a one-hour call with Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. Merz and Zelenskyy are looking for ways to pressure Russia over its war in Ukraine and to prepare for possible peace negotiations. After speaking to Trump and Vance, the German and Ukrainian leaders will hold more talks. That call led by Germany, France, and the UK. For more, we can speak now with DW's chief political editor, Michaela Kufner, in Berlin, and Rosie Birchat is in Brussels for us. Michaela, let's start with you. Why did Merz decide to host Zelenskyy in Berlin today at such short notice?
Clearly, there is huge concern that when Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin lean over a map of Ukraine and Europe, they may make a deal. And as Donald Trump always says ahead of meetings like this, we'll see what happens. And that's what the Europeans are very much afraid of. That's why this is at the same time a show of solidarity with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, as much as it is showing defiance that the Europeans simply won't stand for deciding on Ukraine's future over the head of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the Ukrainian president. So there's a deep concern here what impact that, of course, would have on European security. There's almost unheard of solidarity and unity amongst European and particularly EU states, with the notable exception of Hungary. They've called on for no rash decisions, no territory, no peace to be made above the head of Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
Rosie, how confident are European leaders that they can actually influence how Trump approaches his meeting with Putin on Friday?
Well, look, I think there's two ways of looking at this. On the one hand, you could say Europe looks kind of frozen out of Alaska here. There is clearly no seat for Europe at that table. It's confined to the sidelines as two leaders talk about the future of European security. But you could see it in the other way as a sort of diplomatic win on the European side. Just think about a few months ago when Volodymyr Zelenskyy was being booted out of the White House. That was really sparking absolute panic among diplomats that I was speaking to here in Brussels at the time. Since then, they've been working to try and show that they will stand by Ukraine's side come what may. And now we see Trump is taking their calls. There is an opportunity, at least, for the Europeans to try and get their point of view across. And of course, the big question is whether in any way that will be listened to.
Michaela, tell us more about how the meetings today are expected to unfold. There's a flurry of diplomacy. Tell us more specifically about that virtual meeting with Trump that's supposed to take place today.
Well, that will take place once the Europeans have coordinated amongst themselves. This whole meeting today of the Europeans has already been described by Vladimir Putin, by the Kremlin, as insignificant, I quote. And this already would be a win, of course, for Vladimir Putin, if he managed to prove that point, that indeed the Europeans talking amongst each other, consulting, NATO sitting together, convincing Donald Trump of getting onto the same page, would once again be proved to be insignificant, as it has been before. Just a couple of days after the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz came into office, he headed to Kiev together with the E3, the French president, the Polish prime minister. They spoke to Donald Trump on the phone. They all agreed that there would be a deadline for a ceasefire. Donald Trump was on board. Then he spoke no more of it when that deadline passed. And this is what everybody's really concerned of. First of all, getting Donald Trump to have a common line, not to give up any territory, not to take spontaneous decisions, which is very difficult for him very often, even his staff will admit. And at the same time, making that last and not being once again taken by surprise.
Rosie, what do you see as the main message that Ukraine's European partners are trying to send today?
It's actually nothing new. It's a message in support of Ukraine. And that, of course, is the point here. The Europeans have been trying to demonstrate that they will stand by Ukraine's side. They're going to talk about territorial integrity, about the idea that if Russia were to feel emboldened, that could have catastrophic consequences for European security. And just think how much political capital the Europeans have sunk into trying to get that message across over the last few months. Some of the things they've done to try and ingratiate themselves with Donald Trump. Most European countries agreeing to radically hike their defence spending to 5% of GDP. Many experts say the EU has also toughened its rhetoric on China in a bid to please Donald Trump. And, of course, above all, accepting what many saw as a very detrimental trade deal with the United States for the European Union side. And certainly some sources I was speaking to were saying essentially they thought tariffs were the price to pay to keep the United States on board when it comes to supporting Ukraine. So you can imagine now if a deal were to be cut between the US and Russia that would essentially sell Ukrainian and European security down the river, that would be seen as catastrophic, not only for the actual security situation here in Europe, but also for the look of European diplomatic capacities and clout.
Michaela, these leaders in Europe, including NATO leaders, are meeting in Berlin. They're not meeting in Paris or in London. Friedrich Merz, Germany's Chancellor, has been in office just for 100 days. Why is Germany hosting these talks today and not France or the UK?
Look, this is what can be seen as a success, that Friedrich Merz managed to establish some kind of rapport. Also that the White House was happy with the Germans hosting this. This also shows that very much the Brits, the Germans and the French and the Poles are pretty much aligned. Germany's not just geographically at the center, but really manages to organize leadership here. But the big question is what that leadership will be worth on Friday, and there's lots of different things going on. I mean, at the same time, Donald Trump is punishing India for importing fossil fuels from Russia. So he does kind of takes contradictory measures. But whether today is a success or not can fairly easily be measured by whether Ukraine and or Europe will literally have a seat at the table of that meeting in Alaska on Friday.
Michaela Küffner in Berlin, here down at the Chancellery, and Rosie Burchardt in Brussels. Thank you very much to you both.